Welcome back, Wickerson Studios. Michael Wickerson here. We are continuing with this intro series on Grasshopper 2.0, trying to get everything up and running. We are still in the params tab. We've gone through the containers, data, numeric, and geometric, and we're going to take a look at the inputs, which we've touched on a little bit just to label this. But if you take a look at the inputs, it's going to go from number sliders down to constant picker. And there is a ton in here to learn, and I don't know if it can all be learned just in one quick tutorial, that's for sure. So if we take a look at it, we already talked about labeling over here, which is this text parameter, which we'll get to. But the first things first is the number slider. Now you can't just double click and start typing in a number like 2 and hit enter. Oh my goodness, you can now. How wonderful. Let me try that again. Let me double click and let me type in 00 dot dot, sorry, let's type in 0 dot dot 2.00 and I get a number which might be set to 2, 1. Okay, so there are some fast tracks that have come in since they've been updating, but I have not gotten into all those fast things and how to code number sliders quick. The best thing to do is just drag it down, right click on the center part, set what you need. If you want a quick boolean, you can go to integer. If you want 3 decimal places, you can go here and you can type it in. There's some really nice interface, but once again, go to the documentation, see what's available, take a look at your number sliders, and see how you can put in multiple things as well. It's the most common numerical input object in Grasshopper, so you definitely want to have it up and running. There is some advanced content. The slider needs a lot of user interface still. It's nowhere near done, and proofing this text will be silly until that happens. So as it develops, I'm just going to kind of say that's like a really important node, or it's a very interesting node as it develops, and I'll just label it for my documentation. But you'll slowly figure it out. You can move it around a little bit, shrink, and I think there's possibly, when you bring it in, a little guide here. Move the slider incrementally with the arrow keys. So that's also nice. You move that. If we're clicking on it, I can move it. Well, at least I thought I could. With the arrow keys, it's not sliding around for me. So lots to do with the number slider. That's the most common one, but I am happy that I can start to double click and get here. I am not currently just starting to type commands because there's too much, and I want to go through head to toe, left to right on all of these. The next thing I've got going on, if we take a look, obviously is the text input, which we talked about earlier. If you right click on this section, you're able to change the name of that component, and you can make it visible and invisible. And if you left click on the black, you can type in the text content that goes into it. Right now it's just your text here, and that's what will come out. Remember, you cannot input into panel tools. So the next one that we'll go to is the preset picker, and preset picker is pretty interesting, and I'm going to show you an example here, and this is a small thing. Here's a node that's distance with metric, and the reason I know that is because the preset picker, when I click on it and hit documentation, it shows me this wonderful example of using the distance with metric. This little m you've got to watch for. If it's an MT, it'll be a method, and it will work with the preset value picker, which we will get to. So technically you can go in here and set that and go from angular, radial, Pearson, Jacquard, and it will update. But for the most part, number sliders like this will have an enumerated list of what can happen, and you can see it goes from 0 to 12. So you don't have to use the preset picker, which is convenient. You can still use a number slider set to integers, and that will transform what's coming out of here. So this name will change from Canberra over to the Hamming. And so those are things to think about as we get into it, but really we were looking at the preset picker. If we click on here, we'll see that right here. Hang on a second. Preset picker value. Let's just grab it again and take a look at the documentation. Preset picker shows the preset values of input parameters if they are available, and they're only available, from what I've noticed, is when there is something that pops back out that has the MT changed to the M, which is the metric, and then you can actually change it. So that's something to get your head around and start using and getting more wise to, and we'll see what happens. I'm going to close up my documentation. The next one is the value, which I've yet to use yet, and that's it right there, just setting a value. So you right click, sorry, you left click on the value, and then you can submit exactly like the text parameter. Okay, you chimed at me there on my headset, but you have to manually type that in, and I believe the value will take text and other forms to find one or more values via textual input. Okay, so you have to use text input for the value. Now it gets a little more complicated, and there's a lot more user interface. The number line. And what I would suggest is don't just open a document I have. Make the habit on every new node you're looking at to bring it down in. And if you bring it down in, you'll get this wonderful guide. Very quick. Use the Shift Control. So you have to hold down Shift, then Control, not Control Shift, right mouse button to zoom into the contents of this object. And you'll see this very strange grid start to happen when I do that. So Shift Control, and there's the grid. And then the right mouse button can start to really give this some incredible finesse to what happens. So that's a nice little interface, and you can slide things around in a different way. And you can name it the same with the right click on the main section. That goes exactly the same for the protractor. So practicing what I just said, take the protractor, bring it in, have a read of what that says, switch between different available angles via the protractor menu. So you can go in here, I think it was, there is no shift, hang on a second, and I am pulling this out. Let me grab that, and you'll see that I can keep pulling out in detail how detailed I want that to be. So really nice, and it was shift between the angles right here, sextimal, radians, and turns. So a really nice interface around in here, which I haven't played too much around. Full, half, and infinite. So really cool interface in here if you're dealing with angles and you're not into complete precision, but you want to give people the parameters to make things look right and be a little intuitive in how they're modeling. Let's continue because there is a lot to look at. The display materials right here. Haven't got too far into it because I'm not really on the front end of rendering and pulling things out, but we have to get into that with the metas, and we have to get into that with what's about to happen from the color swatch and the display materials. We'll talk a little bit about the function editor and gradient editor, and then there's a few other pickers we have to look at. So the color swatch, I just left click on here, and what's nice, it will update and get accurate the type of colors. And if you didn't know your color names, what a wonderful thing to practice, but also see the RGB of what's coming out of that. And you can change that from RGB over to HSV, CMY, and so on, SP, and wow, CIE Lab, which I don't know anything about, and Chrome Aticity. I had no idea what these were, so you can accept and close that when you're done. Going to make for some really interesting renders over in this file when you start playing with it, but I think I'm going to keep things simple to start. Once again, when I was doing that, I should have made the habit to bring that color swatch down and see what information it was telling me. It says click on this bar to show the input user interface for this object, so definitely that's what we just did. The next one, as we come in and display material, it says click and drag the top or bottom grips vertically to resize, and that's really all that's happening in the display materials. I've yet to really get into here, so I'm really just changing the size of that as we go. And I thought there was a certain sense of it moving, but anyway, the display materials I've got to get into as I process through the colors. And if you notice what comes out as a panel, you're getting this dot framework of Rhino display and display materials. So you start to use that Rhinoceros API. And think about that. The panel tool is the next one. I'm not sure why I pulled it up here. Maybe I was showing Sergi a few things with it. I'll get rid of that panel tool. Display materials. There's the function editor. That's why I was pulling that out and then showing with the function editor, which we talked about a little bit in the last video. This is an incredible node. So not only the function editor, let's grab that panel which was there and show you that it will show you that function loosely what you're dealing with. But if you go into this with a left click, you are able to grab hold of all of the tabs we covered up here in the math tab beforehand, all of these wonderful things. And since we want to stay with this, and we're not even on maths yet, I'm getting out of order because I've gotten ahead of myself and now back making these videos. You also have the operators that you can use, and you have these details of what can happen within the functions as you make them more and more complicated and layer those. So a function editor detailed view, absolutely fantastic. And then there's these snaps that you can use as well. So the function editor is something I'm very keen on, and I just got rid of my Grasshopper for some reason. G2, let's pop that back open, and we wanted to close the edit, this instead. But this node, as to what's coming out and what's going in, mixed with the math script nodes, which will be evaluate expression and expand expression, are going to be really where I'm coming at modeling and making things and trying to get into using OpenAI with Grasshopper 2.0. So really keep your head on that. The panel tool has a little bit here. The panels collapse. The input values use the value object or the text input instead. So you cannot use this as input as a panel. I've said that several times. That's one of the biggest frustrations. I think people stop using Grasshopper 2.0. Now we have back into params, and we're almost done the inputs, but there's still so much to look at. A gradient editor, and as we pull that in, what does it tell us? Click and drag this grip to horizontally resize the object. That's fine, but let's ignore that for now and go right into a right click here and see that you have incredible interface, almost like the function editor for your gradient editor. So going in here, we've got everything listed, not just monotone, but then a breakdown of all those colors, analytic breakdown of everything as well, right through hues and spectrum, diagrammed. Like I love this ice cream from Italy. Like this is just like insanely detailed all the way down to topography, Icelandic, Pakistani, and then saving a custom editor. So incredible. Then we're going into image or GH text if you want. And what's the next one over here? We can start to see the graphs of monitoring those colors, which is just insane. And then this was hiding, it's making visible again, and then I've got a search that I can go into, and I've got some type of snapping that I can do as well. Over here, you have the ability to then manually go, all the way down to XYZ and chromacity as well. And the last one here is the immediate nearest linear smooth cubic and Gaussian. Just amazing gradient editor. You could spend a few days on that alone figuring out how that works. But once that's done, it's pretty nice. I'm going to jump down and just go into the complex picker, which is really fun because if you haven't gotten off the normal, like the regular line of counting and doing your ranges without complex numbers added, you can start to just have a manual going up and down and finding out what those would be. So if you're getting roots to things and trying to solve for equations that are complex, that's going to be just like a fantastic tool for you to think about. And I think picking the complex, once again, I'm trying to stay with how I'm teaching people complex picker. You can see right here that it's saying click and drag the middle grip and horizontal resize. So same type of interface as before, just these little grips here for making it bigger, smaller if you really want to see that grid and expand it out. I just think it's fantastic. And then you can also control it by this little guy, which is not so much snapping. It's just a wonderful little interface that you don't have to come down here and have precision snapping. Then that brings us to the wonderful constant picker, and it never stops. This is absolutely insane, all the way the fruit, and we're going to end this little tutorial today on this, but you need to look into it. Pre-make yourself a ton of constant pickers. So if I went in here and said mathematical, okay, I need to go back and use these quite often, the zeros, the not a number. I don't even know why I'd use these. Maybe Euler, certainly pi I would use. I'd have that made up beforehand. But look, I can just jump in there again and grab geometry, and I could just make myself a bunch of vectors or directions or planes or whatever I want to have beforehand. So here I'm going to go in and I'm just going to grab geometry and give myself the XY plane. Here I gave myself the unit vectors, and here I might grab myself a zero vector. I'm not sure why, but I would pre-make those and have them as my constants kind of way over in my parameter side. And that continues to text parameters. Wonderful way to break things down, and I not sure if I'd use these for the old scribble tool. I have yet to really think about how I would do that. And then physics, you can jump in here and grab all these wonderful things like the speed of light. And now you feel like Einstein as you're playing around here as you go. So very exciting. And then the last one I kind of want to jump into, and this is something Sergio Espinales and I are really talking about, thinking of getting into. And I think the last one, just for studying lists, it's wonderful to sit in here and make yourself all of your items beforehand with these visuals to maybe make a fruit-based list that you could then get into the data and study all of your list tools as to what's making longest list, shortest list, bracketing list, expanding list. So there's your little game to pre-make kind of your world, if you think of Grasshopper Canvas as this world that you're working on, and then what do you do to go into it. Now we're going to end up over here in the params for another video on utilities, and I'm going to show you some fun stuff that happen here. But I really have not gone into detail on the things that are just monstrous, like the gradient editor and the function editor. I think those two things would be enough to, have a business and have a development group and do what you can. So that's enough of that. I'm going to stop streaming this morning, and I'm going to stop recording. Thank you.